Hello everyone, happy Friday and welcome to the Mylio Photos Coffee Break. My name is Angela and today we're going to be talking about folders and albums, what the differences are, and when to use each in Mylio Photos. Before we dive into today's topic, I do want to let you know about some other events we have going on for you. Next week we're going to have our regular live Q&A every Tuesday and Thursday like normal, 11:30 a.m. Pacific, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. And then on Friday, we're going to have our next coffee break. Next week's topic is going to be about exporting. So if you're looking at ways to share the media that you've collected and organized inside of Mylio Photos, we're going to go through all of the options in the share panel so you know how to make sure everything gets shared the way that you want it to be done and you understand what all of the options are there, because there's some really cool stuff hidden in that panel. So we'll talk about all of that next week. For today, we're going to go ahead and dive in to using folders and albums. For those of you who are new here, the way that this works is we've got a chat pod. If you have questions, go ahead and put your questions into the chat. There will be time for Q&A afterwards. And the questions that you have to ask, they can be on either today's topic or whatever else you need help with Mylio Photos. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into using folders and albums for smarter organization. So the things that we're going to go over today is understanding the differences between folders and albums in Mylio Photos. They are two very different entities, but people oftentimes get them mixed up. And I want to make sure that you guys know the differences, when to use them, and what they are best used for. So that's what we're going to learn how to use them and what to do to create an efficient organization system. And then I'll share some of the best practices for structuring your photo library that works best across all of your devices. So a few reasons why this matters. It's so important to get your library organized, or at least chip away at it. You don't have to have it all done all at once. That's a little bit overwhelming if you're just getting started. But the reason we work towards this goal is we don't want to use our camera rolls because that's just the endless scrolling. You want to be able to find your favorite shots quickly without having to sit there and swipe and swipe and swipe. It saves time, it lowers stress, so you can spend more time enjoying your pictures. Using folders and albums helps you group things that matter. You can have a hierarchy on your folders for, things by time, and then you can group albums in stories and themes your way. It's a great way to help preserve the past. Later on, once things are a little bit more organized, it makes it much easier to share. And then finally, having a solid folder structure makes backups much simpler. So with that, let's talk about folders. Folders in Mylio Photos are the same folders that exist on your hard drives. These are containers that reference the actual location where your photos, videos, and documents live on your computer and external hard drives. Let me let that sink in for a second. Folders are where your stuff physically lives. Mylio Photos does not hold your pictures. Your pictures live in folders on your hard drives. Mylio merely points to those and says, this is what's here. So that's something really fundamental for the way Mylio Photos works. With a lot of other image management systems, they are closed proprietary packages and you don't have access to your stuff. With Mylio Photos, we are very much, you have your stuff is yours, you can do with it what you want. So it is stored in folders on your hard drive, you have full access to those. And what you're seeing in Mylio Photos are the physical folders that live on your computer and external drives. So a few things to think about here. The folders in Mylio are mirroring your folders file structure on your computer. They're directly tied to your device's file system, so you can manage them outside of Mylio. We want you to manage them inside of Mylio, but you can see them and access them outside of Mylio through macOS Finder or Windows Explorer. The best uses for folders are for storing and managing your actual physical photos and keeping a structured hierarchy. When I talk in other presentations about how to structure your folders, I like to go by date. I'll show you mine here in a minute and use a year event strategy. You don't want to have a really deep structure because that gets really hard to manage. So keep it as simple and structured as possible. And things to think about here when you're looking at folders, if you make changes in Mylio Photos, those affect your actual file system. So if you move something from one folder to another inside of Mylio, that is physically moving it on your hard drive. If you change the file name, it's changing the file name on your hard drive. If you delete a picture in Mylio, you are deleting it from your hard drive. So what you do in Mylio affects the actual pictures that live in your system. It is not a closed infrastructure where you can work with immunity and everything outside of it is safe. It is completely tied to your file system. So please keep that in mind. Now let's jump over here to Mylio, and I want to show you my folders view. And I talked a little bit about having a simple folder structure. You have to do what works for you. In my brain, I like dates. And I like to go here, my main photos folder. This is my main hierarchy. You can see I have a bunch of other folders. There's always more stuff to organize. But in general, I like to keep things going by year. And because I've been taking pictures for a long time, I have stuff here that was scanned and then got into digital. And I've got stuff going back many, many years. So instead of just having all of the years listed, I have the current decade listed as individual years. And then I broke things down into 2010s, 2000s, and 1990s. And then you can go as far back with that as you like. Doing the 2010s, the decade here, that's optional. It really depends on how you want to interact with your pictures. For me, it kept my view a little bit less cluttered. And then within each one of these, if I say go here into my 2024, you can see that I have individual folders for specific events. So when I'm traveling, when I'm going out with friends, when I'm going on a photo shoot, I actually will come back, and for that day, I will name that folder something descriptive. So I will name it with the date that I took the pictures, and I will name the event. Now, you don't necessarily have to get this granular. Some people take a little bit broader approach here and go, they have the year, and then maybe everything for the month they put into one folder. And then maybe have a specific call-up folder for that special vacation or special event that you did. For me, this system works really well, and you can see that the file structure is not that deep. I've got my main folder, my decade, my year, and then I have the actual event. So that's the structure that I typically recommend for people, but you can modify that to fit however your mind works, however you like to recall. But I do often recommend using something time-based for your folder structure. Now, people get often confused between albums and folders because they want to group together things. They want to find, a grouping of all of this person, or a grouping of everything from this event, or my best pictures from last year. That's where albums really come in, is because that's virtual organization, and we're going to talk about that next. Before we go any further, I just want to take a look here in the chat. Lori, are there any questions related to what we've talked about so far that I need to answer? Excellent. All right, so let's jump back over to the presentation and talk a bit about albums. So where folders are the physical place where your pictures live, albums are completely virtual. They are contained in Mylio Photos only, and excuse me, you can use them to group things however you like. They're infinitely flexible, and when you put things into an album, because it's virtual, you can have one picture in as many different albums as you want without physically duplicating things. And that's brilliant, because if you have, say, a really great picture of your mom, you might want to have that picture in this grouping of pictures of mom. And that might also be from, your aunt's wedding. And that also might be, some other grouping that you have. You're putting together a slideshow. You might have all these different groupings where that one picture of mom should be in all of those. If you were to use folders for that, you would have to physically duplicate that image for each one of those. And that's going to take up that much more space on your hard drive. And later on, that's duplicates that somebody else who inherits your library is probably going to want to clean up. So keep that in mind. Folders should be your kind of master copy where everything lives in a relatively sequential order. And then albums is where you group things together in a way that's meaningful for you, because it's virtual and you can put individual images into multiple places. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So virtual collections, they do not move your original files. They still live in that folder where they live. So your folders remain intact, and albums are referencing those pictures. So it's a flexible way to group pictures together without changing their location. And some of the best ways to use this is for thematic collections, say the best of 2024, or family favorites, or my photography portfolio, or other things that I've used it for, like home projects I've done around the house. So like before and after pictures or process pictures of renovations, or other like woodworking projects or anything like that that you might do, that you want to see that sequence of events and you want to pull those things together into an individual grouping. That's what albums are really, really good for. And that makes it easier later if you want to go ahead and share those and view them, pull those things up when you want them. So things to consider for using albums is when you remove a picture from an album, it doesn't delete the original. It's just removing it from the album. Again, that picture still lives in your folder. So you go to folders view, you can still see those pictures, and you just remove or add things to the albums as you like. So let's jump over here and take a look at this. I'm going to switch over to our albums view, and you'll see over here we have a very nice navigation, much like we do in our folders, that lets you see what nested albums you have. So your albums don't need to just be a single layer. They certainly can, but you can have other things here to where you can go into and see depth. So for instance, here under my demos, I do a lot of demos here for Mylio. I have a lot of sub albums that I've grouped together pictures from different parts of my library to show different techniques. And I can go into these and see exactly which one of these were. So when I did the webinar for artifacts, I can go in here and see all 3 of the projects that I did. Later on, I can go scroll down here and I can say, oh, I want to see all of the pictures I took of the Argus rangefinder. This is a really cool camera I found at a thrift shop. And here's all of my raw images. And then here are all of my edits. So I put together an album for that. I have an album here for fallen leaves. These are some pictures that I took a few years ago during the autumn. I pulled these beautiful leaves inside and I just kind of watched them decay. So this one here, this gorgeous one here went from that to that. And then I think it might have even been to that. So just watching them change over time. And it was just a really fun photographic thing that I did. So I wanted to group all these together. They were taken on different days and at different times, but I wanted to keep this collection together. These are my favorites of that experiment. So these are different ways that you can use albums. They are very, very flexible. And again, it's completely virtual. So if I ever want to see what folder these live in, I can go ahead and click on this picture and click on this little folder icon here, show in folder, and that's going to jump me to the folder where that image lives. And then I can back out one layer and see, okay, that's the folder that that's contained in. So there's a lot of different ways that you can navigate back and forth, and folders and albums are extremely complementary. So use your folders for your broad level organization, and then use your albums for those specific thematic groupings. So before I jump any further, I do see a couple of questions that have popped up. And Kirk says, if I reorganize my folders, how does Mylio follow that? So Kirk, what I would recommend is if you want to reorganize your folder structure, to do that from within Mylio Photos. That is going to be the best way to do that. So I can take this folder here and I can drag and drop that someplace else. So let me go ahead and close this. Let me say, okay, maybe this isn't 2020. This actually was 2021. I can drag that and actually move that folder. And that's going to physically move that on my hard drive. If instead you decide to go out and do that in the file system, Mylio might lose track of what you do. So you might end up with exclamation points and question marks on your folders that say, Mylio's lost this. What do I do? Typically you can click on that, follow the prompts, and you can tell it where the new location is. But in order to avoid that confusion and sometimes a little bit of fear if you think maybe I lost something, is to just move things around from within Mylio Photos, and that's going to give you a better, smoother experience. Now, something to keep in mind if you're moving folders around in Mylio is that change that happens on your hard drive may not be instantaneous. And that's because Mylio is this distributed system and it has folders across all of your devices that mimic your folder structure. So you go ahead and make the change here in Mylio, it's going to make that change on your computer, but that still has to replicate out to each of your vaults, to your phones, any other devices you have connected. So when you're making those changes, don't get afraid that it didn't move immediately in your folder and your file system. Just give it time. Mylio will propagate those changes. You just have to be patient. And then here to Harold, would you please go over hiding or removing folders from Mylio without deleting them from the drive? Some of my subfolders are not do not contain files that Mylio can see, e.g. Capture One data. So Harold, we have instructions for that in the manual. It's a rather advanced process. It's not terribly clean, especially if there's subfolders. If it is a top level folder, that's pretty simple. You can go to a top level folder and say, in this folder here, I want to right click on this and say remove folder from catalog. And that just tells Mylio, stop watching this location. But if what you're looking at is a very deeply nested folder, so let's say I go in here and say this folder here has some stuff I don't want in Mylio, I just want to remove it. There's more advanced steps you have to take. It's not a super seamless process, but I do have instructions for that. So I think Lori put that into the chat. So please give that a look. If you have questions about that, feel free to message me in the community, or we can follow up on that on the Q&A next week if you're able to attend. All right. So coming back into the presentation, some of the key differences here to be aware of. With folders, they are physically tied to the file system. Albums are not. When you move things, it physically moves them in the file system when you're using folders. That is not the case with albums. And when you're working with folders in Mylio, that organizes, again, where they are physically stored. Albums are virtual. The best use for organizing by theme or by project is to use an album, because you can have multiple images that belong in multiple different albums. And if you used folders for that, you would end up having to physically duplicate those, taking up more space, creating duplicates, and a mess for whoever inherits your library. The beauty of this is both are accessible from all of your Mylio devices. You go either to the folders view or you go to the albums view, and you can access all of this organization that you've done from any of your devices that are connected to Mylio, which is absolutely wonderful. All right, so which one should you use? This is a question I get all the time. You want to use folders when you want to manage the file structure that's on your computer. If you're wanting to move things around in macOS Finder or Windows Explorer, go ahead and use the folders view in Mylio Photos. I do recommend keeping a structured hierarchy. Don't make it too deep. Keep it as simple as possible. And I recommend that year event for your subfolders. You can do year, month, and have everything from the month in there if that makes more sense to you. Or if you want to go big, you could just have a folder for every year and then do everything else in albums. That all is up to you how deep you want to go. For me, the year to event makes the most sense. And again, just to refresh what that looks like is if I go here into say 2024, I have things like, you make this a little bigger, the date, Southern California Railway Museum, Mission Trails, Las Vegas Darkroomers trip. So I have little descriptions. So at a glance, whether I'm in Mylio or if I'm in my file system, I know exactly what's in that folder. It doesn't have to be a ton of information, but just a few words that indicate what's there. And I found that to be a really sustainable system for me. But I do recommend thinking through what is going to work best for you. Whatever system you choose, be consistent. Pick a system and go with it. You don't have to give it a ton of thought. Just make sure you're picking a system and that's what you're using moving forward. And that's going to make your life a lot easier. And again, using folders when you want those changes to be reflected in your file system, because it is that direct tie when you manage folders in Mylio, they are actually being physically moved and managed on your hard drive. Now, when you want to use albums is when you want to group things around without moving them. You want to put that one picture into 3 different things because it relates to 3 different things. You don't want to make duplicates and you don't want to physically move them. So albums are very, very flexible for those thematic collections, and it's non-destructive, meaning you can put things into all of those albums, and when you're done, say that album is no longer necessary, you created the slideshow, you presented it, you no longer want that cluttering of your albums view, you can remove it. Those pictures are still part of your library, but that grouping is gone. So it's really, really nice to be able to have that flexibility in your organization. All right, so using these together, in my opinion, gives you the best of both worlds. So folders for structure give you a logical, consistent hierarchy, and it gives you a place to put everything and keep them organized. The way that I like to think of my folders is this is my uncluttered long-term archive that when I'm looking at it in Mylio, it mirrors my file system. That's the baseline. Albums are great for projects and themes, so you can move things around without moving files, create those thematic sets. You can pull images from multiple folders, so they don't have to all be from the same folder. You can pull things from all of your library and put them in an album, and then quickly curate and share those selections without disrupting that uncluttered long-term archive you've made with your folders. So pro tip, keep your folder structure simple and then use albums for short-term or evolving projects. So a few last minute takeaways here. Folders and albums help you find what you need fast. A well-organized library puts your favorite photos at your fingertips. It really does help eliminate that endless scrolling as you go through your camera roll trying to find that one image. It definitely saves you time, reduces stress, and helps you enjoy your memories. Organizing with purpose is a way to group those things together in a way that tells stories that you want to tell. So those albums, that's your great way to tell stories. It's also really helpful for family history. I talk to a lot of people who are like, well, I want to have this folder for this side of the family and this folder for this side of the family. But when those two branches of the family merge, where do those pictures go? I think that's where albums really come in powerfully, is that you can have albums for different sides of the family. And when you do have that overlap, or let's say there's a wedding where two sides of the family come together, which side do you put them into? You can put those pictures into both sides of the family if you want. So again, it's a really great way to keep things organized the way that you want without creating extra clutter. When you have an album that's curated, you can share it very easily. We'll go over how to do that next week. And again, when you have a logical, good hierarchy in your folder structure, it does make backing up a lot smoother, easier, and you can see that structure mirrored across all of your vaults. So it gives you tremendous peace of mind knowing that everything is safe, everything is secure, and albums can be flexible and even somewhat disposable if you want to use them for a temporary basis. Well, then just a reminder, we've got live Q&A next Tuesday and Thursday. Those are at 11:30 a.m. Pacific, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. Hope you guys can join me for that. If you have any follow-up questions on what we discussed today, those are great events to come to, and we can certainly dive a little bit more in depth on some of your questions. And also feel free to post in the community, and Lori and I take a look at that pretty frequently, and we will do our best to get those answered there as well. On Friday next week, we're going to talk about exporting and sharing. So all of the different ways you can get your stuff out of Mylio and into the hands of your loved ones so they can enjoy it as well. So hope you guys will join me for that. Again, I want to thank you for joining me today. Thank you, Lori, for sharing all of the links in the chat. That's always very helpful, and making sure I don't miss anything. Looks like Bill's asking, how do I see the recorded version of this class? Bill, these are usually posted within 24 to 48 hours in the community. And there's a section in the community called Coffee Break Replays. You can find all of them there. With that, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again for being here. See you next time. Bye, everybody.